Okay, we would like to start with paying our respects. We were very saddened to hear that Anna Maria Di Cara has passed away. She was many times attending our color talks and held numerous positions at our sister association, the Colour Society of Australia. Anna Maria was a fellow of the Design Institute of Australia. She initially established her consultancy in Sydney, Australia in 1994. She was an educator at Tufts Sydney Institute and Moore Design Centre since 2000, plus was an occasional Australian representative at the AIC International Colour Association conferences. Anna Maria, your positive input will be missed, and we wish your family, friends and colleagues much strength. Then I would like to share our agenda for our upcoming events. The first one, really excited about this one, is on the 29th of June. We will be visiting the exhibition of Joseph and Annie Albers in the beautiful Art Deco Villa Empin in Brussels. When one talks about the interaction of color, one cannot exclude Joseph Albers. Many professionals working in the field of color today still encounter his way of teaching color. Let us share experiences about our interaction with the work and teaching of Joseph Albers while visiting the exhibition together. This free event is for members only. You just pay your entrance fee. So you can still become a member and join us in Brussels if you want. Our second is after the summer. It's on the 12th of October. We will organize together with the design studio Nike a 2026 and beyond color forecasting research workshop, and participants will get into the process of how to develop that inside the design studio. The workshop is open to a limited number of participants, and of course the members of ICA-Belgium will receive a discount. We are organizing all the details at the moment, so put yourself on the waiting list if you do not want to miss out on the information and the possibility to be with the first to register. And then the last event we are organizing is on the 24th of November. Then we will organize our last color talk of this year. So 3 important dates: 29th of June, 12th of October, and the 24th of November. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will now give the mic to Maya, who will introduce our speaker of today.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome. I apologize for the noise here. We had just an outpour of rain in Brussels. It's a huge outpour. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm really, really happy to introduce our speaker today. For quite some time, I have been following Sonia van den Haar's work, and as much many of you as well. So let me introduce her to you today. Sonia van den Haar is an artist and architecture color specialist. She formed Lymesmith in 2011 as a color-focused studio working to produce site-specific artworks and material palettes for the built environment. Born in Australia, she studied painting at the School of Art and Design of Australian National University and fresco painting at the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda, India, where her journey towards an integrated art and architecture practice began. She also completed an architecture degree at the University of New South Wales. Her studio, Lymesmith, reflects her cross-disciplinary interests and position outside of traditional gallery-based art making. In both her architectural and artwork, Sonia is known as Lymesmith. So Sonia, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome, and the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's lovely to see everybody. I'm going to just share my screen with you, and we can look at some pictures. I've got the right one. Yes. Okay, can everybody see this well?
Yes, it's great.
Yes.
Yeah,
we can see.
perfect.
Wonderful. Okay, yes, thank you, Maya, for the introduction. Why is that not advancing? Sorry, for some reason I can't advance the slide. Wait a moment. Oh, I know why.
On top, there's standing play. You probably have to push that
I
one.
think, yeah, it was
Or-
because we did do a test, didn't we?
Or you can go try to go out of the full view. Sometimes that helps.
Oh, here we go. I think that's right now. Yes. Okay, I've got it right. Sorry about that. Okay, I would like to give an acknowledgement of country. I am speaking to you from Canberra in Australia. And I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, whose land was stolen from them. And still today, there's been no treaty with Australia's Indigenous people. In Canberra, where I live now, Aboriginal people have lived here for more than 20,000 years. And the city of Canberra, which is our capital city, began construction just 111 years ago. So I just want to specifically acknowledge that my own work with place and thinking about colour and country has been guided, enriched and informed by Aboriginal art and culture ever since I can remember. And I'm really grateful that I've grown up in contact with the world's oldest living culture. And, you know, I wouldn't be doing the work that I do in the way that I do it, in quite the way that I do it, I think, without the influence and teaching that I've received from Indigenous peoples throughout my life. So Lymesmith is my studio name, and as May said, all the things that I make, paintings, murals, public art, colourful architecture, I attribute to Lymesmith. My work's very collaborative in the sense that it's always created in response to things in the world, to existing conditions, and usually to buildings. It's collaborative in that I'm working as part of a design team with architects and interior designers, and of course my clients. So I think it's really a reactive or a responsive practice that I have. I need to work from specific conditions really in order to know where to start. Having trained in both painting and architecture, I've developed a practice as, for want of a better name, an architectural colour specialist. I've been called a colour therapist for architects, a muralist, a colour whisperer, and an artist. But, you know, at its heart, my work is really collaborative, and I love to collaborate with architect-led design teams on public projects. I think of my work as really a painting practice, but it's painting in 3 dimensions to explore the potential of colour to enrich architecture and to make explicit connections between buildings and landscape, and I guess buildings and stories, buildings and places, and people and places. The slides that I'm flicking through are just a kind of sample of some of the work that I've done over the last 13 or 14 years. And yes, just by way of a short introduction, really. I've recently also started teaching my approach to architectural colour design to architects and spatial designers in Australia, because I feel there's a great need for the profession to engage with the opportunities of colour for the well-being of building users. Cities and towns in Australia are very young, and, you know, many are quite crude and crass, and I think it's fair to say people here have grown up with great experiences of beautiful landscapes and climate, but generally poorer experiences of what architecture can be. Many of the historic buildings we do have may be beautiful, but they are often climatically unsuitable and have a poor relationship to the landscape. But having said that, you know, I work with fantastic architects and whose work is highly attuned to place, and I'm offered, you know, exciting opportunities to play with colour and to learn what it can do. I work on projects where colour functions in very different ways, and I try to articulate and apply the colour strategies that respect the architectural language of a particular building and that satisfy the client brief, and also bring my own painterly expression or conceptual approach to the project to create spaces that are memorable and joyful and distinctive, and yet always, I hope, feel appropriate to place. My ambition is really to enrich places, but not to dominate them. So some of the ways I do this is supporting architects in their truth to materials approach, where colour is applied very carefully to support tectonics and the natural materiality of a building. You know, colour can be very much a kind of have a supporting role, applied colour that is. I use colour as a delicate companion in refined material palettes to gently nudge hesitant clients into embracing the joy and atmosphere that colour can bring to a house. I use colour to challenge and excite interaction with so-called natural materials and to create dynamic, interesting spaces. I think colour can articulate the breaking down of boundaries between interior and exterior spaces, something that is really important in our outdoor lifestyle in Australia. Colour can be used to create a radical openness to the street and to the community. Using colour with attention to a site's physical characteristics, in this case, the sandstone cliffs, makes a public toilet overlooking one of the world's most beautiful coastlines a contributor to that landscape and not a detraction from it. I paint roads and I paint ramps. This is an access ramp into a theatre. And I didn't paint the people, but I painted the road, which inspired the people to paint themselves and ride nude through the streets of their town. I really love painting murals. I didn't start out, when I started Lymesmith, it was really focused on architectural colour, I guess, but over the last maybe 6 or 7 years, I've had a bit of a return to painting murals. I think colour, for me, you know, it stimulates our brains, it connects and communicates, it creates a dance of pattern recognition. And I like to think of my work as joining into this dance out in the world, maybe adding some new steps and inviting others to dance along too. This particular mural is very dear to me. It had to be approved by the local council because it's in a heritage conservation zone. And, you know, it was a bit of a process for that to happen. And I'm really pleased that I was able to demonstrate that a contemporary work could be a contributing element in a heritage conservation zone. And this mural has become a real local landmark in its area. This mural is in ceramic, in a pool, around a pool. And I think the other thing that I love is to try and work with the natural environment, but set up works that exist in a kind of dynamic harmony. I'm not trying to really, when I talk about working with place, I'm not talking about camouflage. I'm talking about creating new and interesting relationships. it was Louis Barragan who said he leaves the greens to Mother Nature. And I think he had a really valid point in that. So all these projects are on my website if you want to find out more detail about them. That's where you will find it. But what I want to do now is to talk about 3 more recent projects, which are just in a bit more depth, talk a bit more about my process and my thinking about place and colour and the different ways that that might be expressed. So the first one is the Blacktown Animal Rehoming Centre, or BARC, as it's known. This is a shelter where animals that have been abandoned or are taken and tried to be gotten ready for adoption. So my contribution to this project encompassed designing the colour and material selection for the entire facility, as well as designing a kind of site-specific artwork, which is really a fence. It's a security fence, but the client, the local council, wanted the building to look friendly and engaging to the public. And so, you know, the question was, what can we do with this fence to make it not look like all the animals are in prison? The site is really interesting. It's in Western Sydney, and it's on the left you can see the industrial estate, just big sheds and industry, and then on the right to the east is the Western Sydney parklands, and this is a remnant endangered habitat, but it's also a major recreational space and wildlife area for people of Sydney. The building typology, the site, and the use all influence the colour responses that I propose to my architectural collaborators. So in the industrial context, you know, these are the kind of buildings you see. They're usually just big sheds, concrete or steel. They're always grey, and if there's a bit of colour, it's really just used for signage and branding. It's pretty crude, and usually primary colours. The building is 6 buildings, in fact, and a very big facility. You can see my mouse. No, I can't. The mouse doesn't work for some reason. There's like 6 fingers of buildings. There's kennels. There's the cat accommodation. There's where people come into the public reception and to adopt animals, to meet prospective cats or dogs that they might take home, and then a veterinary hospital, and then rooms for volunteers. It's a really large facility. This gives you a better view. The buildings are, again, simply sheds, but there's a lot of corridors, a lot of walking to do, and a lot of navigating around a complex space. But the thing that was interesting to me really was that context of the industrial and the wildlife, and then the domesticated pets in between that. And my thinking was that at the same time as looking after our domesticated animals, that mustn't be at the detriment of the native animals, which are also you know, finding survival difficult in Western Sydney. And so my idea was to sort of celebrate bird species from the local from the local reserve, the Nurraginji Reserve, and there was a local bird watchers association who record the sightings there, and I had discussions with them about which birds could be maybe used in as a sort of genesis for the colour palette in the animal shelter. So this was the sort of the initial concept. The fence itself is much longer than what ended up being built. That was an earlier situation. And so what I did was try to develop a kind of functional colour palette using the colours of the different birds to identify different buildings, and one to apply to this screen at the front, and to apply. Each building was going to be given a bird as its representative animal. So these are just some of it was an incredibly detailed project, and this is a regent honey eater, and some of the materials and finishes that were going to be used. I also designed a sort of pattern for the tiles in the bathrooms, in the different facilities that were sort of trying to evoke a patterning of a bird's wing. And then the signage designer took the colour palette and used it and made these little diagrams of each bird to appear in the buildings to help with the naming of the birds. So it was a huge project, and what was really lovely about it was that once the people that worked there and the managers started to come into the space and see what we were doing, and they really loved the bird story and requested that we write an interpretation into the public areas so that when people came into the space, they could understand what the connection was with the colours, the fences, the colours on the buildings, and also to learn that they could just walk through past the site, and there was an access into the cycleways and walking paths into the Western Sydney parklands, and they could walk 500 metres and go bird watching. So the fence is, as I said, it's basically a security fence. But it's nice because when you're moving around the space and different light conditions, it's something that's always changing. So this is how the facility turned out. Here are the birds. And just a few more pictures. I think this was at the opening ceremony. I think the importance of having a story like this is really for the community and for the people that use the buildings after the designers have all gone home. This was a major project for this local government area, very important to so many people, and such an important project for demonstrating a kind of best practice approach to animal welfare. So yeah, this was the opening ceremony. In the dog adoption, in the cat and dog adoption area in the main hall, actually, we've also used these colours. And it was thought that when we started the project that adopting cats was a lot more difficult than adopting dogs. And so a lot of what you can see in the centre at the back there is this sort of cat playground. And even in these areas here, the cats have got very active sort of spaces and little cubby houses and things to play with, and combined with the colours and everything, it's a really engaging space. And now actually the people that run the facility are saying they don't have enough they don't have enough cats. The cats are being adopted way more quickly than, and now they're having trouble adopting the dogs, which was always not that the dog space is bad, but it's that, you know, dogs are different in that they don't have this sort of they can't play so much in a small space, so it's a bit more difficult. But I'm currently just starting to work on a new animal shelter project, which is going to be great because, you know, so many of the lessons that we learnt from this project we can take into the next one. So that's the animal shelter. It was already mentioned that, you know, we have Q&A at the end, so please put questions in the chat if you think of them, because I'm more than happy to answer questions. So the second project I want to talk about is called Between Mountains, and it's a mural project. It's the largest mural commission that I have ever completed. It's 440 square meters and 7 stories high. So the area marked in yellow there on the screen is where it's located in this sort of central void space in the building. This is a plan view. It's quite a, it's not a lovely building. It's not that well designed. It's a very deep floor plate, a very big block. So most of these apartments are single orientation, just light from one side, accessed by a corridor. And if you can see that on the plan, there's these, you know, corridors that go around corners, all these things that really are not great psychologically. But it's interesting to me because it's an adaptive reuse project. It was a service department building, and then it was bought by an investment company who completely refurbished the building and now selling the apartments for individual owners. On the plus side, however, most of the apartments do have quite good views of the surrounding landscape, in particular to the two, well, I can't really call them mountains to Europeans. They're kind of like little bumps in the landscape. But in Canberra, we call them mountains. Black Mountain, Galambari is traditional name, and Mount Ainslie. So the building is right between these two peaks, but the central light well brings light into this deep floor plate, but it's kind of very monotonous, not very inspiring. There's light, but there's nothing to look at. So that was the space before painting it. I'm going to see if my friend colleague who helped me paint the mural made this little video. I'm going to see if that will play.
The mural is called Between Mountains because we are standing between Black Mountain, Galambari, and Mount Ainslie on the right. The building, if you draw a line between the summit of each of these modest little peaks, it bisects this building right through the atrium. But internal in this atrium, where all the public circulation, there's no view. It's just this very closed space, and it was a very planned space, just a white on a white wall. And so I wanted to kind of bring something of the character of each of these mountain landscapes into this void space. I've collected colours this side from Black Mountain, and that's reflecting kind of the palette from the sort of southeastern slope of the mountain, which is cooler and wetter and greener. And then on the Mount Ainslie side, that's more rocky, it's drier, there's more eucalyptus, and so the colours reflect that, the rocks, the lichens, the kind of hotter side of the
So I hope the sound wasn't too bad. That was just a little impromptu video that Leah made. When I say collected colours, my process was really to spend time. So I guess first of all, there's the discovery of that location of the mountains. So when I visited the apartments and I could see the views, and I'm thinking this is really interesting, and this internal space is so bland, and you can't orient yourself. Like when you go into the building and you come out of the lift, you sort of don't always know what way you're facing. So I wanted to make something that would help locate people in the building and bring something of the environment, the site, into that internal space. So yes, just as a sort of exercise, I was looking at the topography and I was looking at maps, and then I realized that that the building itself was exactly in between the two, the summits of each of these mountains. And there were two sides to the atrium, And so, yeah, the concept kind of came from there. So then I went walking and spent time with my color palettes and camera, walking around each of the mountain and seeing from where I could sort of see the building in the city, and from one peak to the other, you know, look across and just observe the different kind of habitats that, you know, because if you walk around a mountain on Galambari, you can walk, there's a loop, there's a walking track right around. So you kind of can walk through the different types of plant communities that have adapted to the different conditions, whether they're, you know, on the hot side or the cool side, and so forth. I always really try and start with natural materials and the natural world, whether it's rocks or plants or flowers or whatever, for developing color palettes. I always find that it's just so inspiring and inexhaustible source of information. So, and when I'm working on a project, I'm always, I guess, casting a really wide net. I start from a long way out from my site, and it's a process of refining down. Yeah, I never just kind of start with, oh, like, here's a few colors I want to use. I'm actually trying to take a temperature of a place and collect, I guess it's a kind of data for me on that place, and develop a kind of mood. It helps me to observe what I'm seeing and to really see patterns, really. I guess I'm interested in patterns. So in this project, I kind of digitally made all these swatches, and then I end up with hundreds of them, and they don't really make much sense or do much when they're just bundled together. But then I start sorting them out and kind of putting them into groups and playing around with them and seeing how many colors, you know, you can see the greens here are very olivey, very kind of brownish greens and lime greens, and, you know, they're certainly reflective of the color palette of the Canberra bush. And then I was trying to make a, I decided that the building address is 100 Northbourne Avenue. And I decided to grid up this mural into 100 rectangles on each side, and the proportions of this really fit well within that space. It's a 20-meter high space. And so I had this grid of 100, and I started to play around with the colors, but then I realized that to handle so many different colors on each side would logistically be very difficult. So then I went through a process of trying to repeat colors and reduce the overall number whilst maintaining the appearance and complexity. So of course I had to work with the interaction of color to achieve that as an aim. So the final design is these two sides of the mountains. One's the warmer side, one's the cooler side. And I introduced sort of shapes, and also I was playing with the shadows that fall on the building that change seasonally. The wall is north facing, which is the side that gets the most sun, but in different seasons, the light comes down onto the wall in different ways. This is us painting. We painted off a swing stage, which was very exciting. I hadn't done that before. And actually it was great, because being in actually an enclosed space rather than hanging off a building, you know, out in the wind, I think that would have been a little bit more scary, but this was actually really fun, much more fun than being on a scissor lift. What else did I want to say about that? That's really, I guess, what I love about the mural, and having this situation of with a lot of glass surrounding it. There's so many reflections that happen throughout the space as the light changing. So it's a sort of seasonal event, I guess, that people can enjoy the light changing throughout the year, different times of the day, different reflections as you come in and out of apartments. And what I wanted to achieve with this was not a painting that looked like a kind of wallpaper where you can look at it from one floor and you know that it's basically the same on every floor, the same colors and so forth. So I ended up using 100 different colors in this mural, and I wanted to give some sort of indication of how complex and how beautiful colors in the landscape are if you see them in a large scale like this. And I had to also, just for pragmatic reasons and to meet the budget, I had to paint in such a way that was very systematic and could all be kind of done from the top down, row by row. And, you know, I could sort of apply a system. It was logistically very complicated to have the right colors in the right position, 3 painters on the wall at one time, and we would have 12 to 16 colors per row, with each color with, you know, a brush, a roller, the tin of paint, and all of the templates for marking out the design. Anyway, it was hugely fun to do. Yeah, that's Between Mountains. The third project I would like to talk about is Apartment for an Older Man. This was a special collaboration between architect Philip Arnold, he's on the right there, our client Michael Dow, who doesn't mind us calling him an older man, and a builder, Jonathan Hughes, and myself. This, Philip is a really creative and inventive architect, and at the same time, he's very pragmatic. He loves experimenting with colour, and this project was our third together. And as our working relationship has developed, he's been willing to take bigger risks and to rely on me to develop colour ideas in tandem with, you know, with his own. Like, he brings ideas to the table and says, you know, I know you can make this work. So he came to me with the brief that everything in this project would essentially depend upon the paint and the colour scheme. There were to be no expensive materials. Everything would be stripped back to essentials, and quite a radical colour strategy would be the distinctive feature of the apartment. So this is a 100-year-old apartment in inner city Sydney, and our client Michael, 76-year-old man, had bought the apartment, determined that he would be living independently for the last hopefully decades of his life, in a space tailored to his specific needs and his way of living. I guess he wanted an apartment that would allow him to age in place, and especially one that really expressed his lifestyle, his personality. And in his words to me, he said, white is the colour of death and of hospitals, and he didn't want any of it. He loves photography, in particular, a really saturated Kodachrome photography. He gave me a book of photographs by Saul Leiter, the New York photographer. He's a retired food critic, and he loves to cook and entertain. He told me his favourite dish to cook was bouillabaisse. And during his kind of, I guess, mid-life, big part of his life was during, you know, Memphis design, postmodernism. He loves Missoni, pop culture. And, you know, really he's someone that's grown up with colour and completely unafraid of it. Philip, the architect, had sort of conceived, had this, after getting Michael's brief, conceived of the apartment as something akin to Saint Jerome in his study. A central desk is in the apartment, which would allow Michael to survey his environment with everything he needed within reach. The outside world is there too. I think that's a lovely thing about this image. There's views through the window, but it's all just kind of held back. And the central space is very much a place of sort of peaceful retreat and reflection. I'm just going to flick through some images so you can see the evolution of what was very much an experiment. And actually, after we'd presented the color concept to the client, to Michael, and he was enthusiastic about it. He was like, yes, I love it. Let's go ahead. Philip called me and said, well, that's great. Michael's on board. Sonia, how confident are you that this is going to work? And I said, not very, unless I have the opportunity to refine the colors on site and to make changes as the project evolves. I said, I'm kind of like 70% confident in the colors themselves, but until we start painting, until I see the different effects that different colors bring to the rooms, I just feel like I can't just give you a set of documents and say, paint this way and it's all going to be fine. So what the builder agreed to do, and that's what you can see here, is that that was complete all the demolition in the apartment and then get the painters in to actually apply a coat of paint on everything possible. And so that I could come and review and spend time in the process and then look at areas that I hadn't quite resolved and decide what to do. And in this way, it was just a fantastic opportunity for me to kind of do this painting in 3 dimensions. The builders were not required to protect the paintwork. They could just carry on as normal doing the work. And then I had time to visit different times of day, ask for more painting to be done, that kind of thing. So the project evolved, and there were, there were some areas that were just horribly unsuccessful, like that on the right, the sunroom area. I knew it was going to be a lighter space, and I wanted it to be lighter and the darker spaces to be darker, but I made the difference too great and it was just really jarring. The colors looked hideous, and that particular space, I think we repainted at least 3 times, maybe 4, before I actually got it right. So yeah, there it is again, just looks horrible. So how is this place-based design? It's different in that the brief is more about creating an inner world, I guess, rather than connecting to the outside, the physical outside as such. However, I think as one ages and relishes time alone and time in contemplation, the quality of the interior landscape becomes even more important. It was clear to all of us that the small white apartment was very dull. To me, it was claustrophobic. And I think that to stand in a room and take in the whole thing at one glance and like to immediately understand its qualities and its size is extremely boring. And whilst Michael wanted the space to reflect his interests and have everything he loved at his fingertips, his kitchen, his music, his films, his books, he didn't want to live in a space that was just like a storage unit. Everything was rational. Personally, I've come to feel that impoverished and bland surfaces like bright white plasterboard are stressful due to their monotony. And spaces that are complex and yet display cohesion and harmony are much more calming. In developing this color palette, I was really trying to create an interior landscape, create a place that was particularly Michael's place, and to expand the perception of the space through layering and contrast. And by using the palette, which I think had about 12 colours in it, using the palette of colours in different combinations in each room, and by using juxtapositions of colour to make the apartment feel more expansive. I think when you sort of make a darker space feel darker and cozy and a lighter space lighter, you're sort of stretching time between them in a sense. It's difficult. It's actually a difficult space to convey in photographs. I think it always looks a bit brighter, a bit more, I suppose, over the top than it is in reality. It's difficult to convey the feeling of being in the space through photos, which is actually deeply relaxing. Guests love to explore the various spaces and often comment on how good it feels and how much they love it. What struck me after spending a few evenings with Michael as a dinner guest and meeting his friends was how much people love to visit a beautiful and interesting and different place. Compare that to the experience of the generic interiors and institutional spaces that many older people end up living in. Thinking about that has been really interesting for me. I've always found my older clients to be so adventurous with colour. I think many because they feel greater self-confidence to not care about the opinions of others, and in combination with that is their memories and experiences throughout their lives. I think they feel they're somehow better reflected with interesting colour palettes. And I've come to feel, I think, that colour can give strength to older people. I mean, probably to everybody, but I've observed that many times with older clients. So yeah, for me, they're really a joy to work with. Interestingly, that so that's now that on the left there is that little balcony space, which has a lot more light. And going back to this idea of place-based colour, I had sort of felt at times like, how am I responding to the contexts and outside? But in fact, until I consciously looked at these colours in relation to the views and the buildings that you see beyond, which this photo doesn't pick it up so much, but there's actually a lot of brick and terracotta and these kind of warm tones, which are in the palette, but I hadn't used them in that little balcony space, enclosed balcony space. It wasn't until I did that and made that connection between what was outside and what was inside that the space actually worked. So that was funny because that's something I talk about all the time and say to my clients, you know, there has to be a relationship between what you see beyond the architecture and what's inside for there to for the space to feel right. And in this project, I kind of tried to deviate from that and I just couldn't make it work. So I had to relearn my own lesson. Yes, so that's the space from further back. So it is a contrasting space. The other thing about that is Michael really hated that cutout shape. There's like a T-shaped opening into that space. And so, so by sort of breaking up the color around that, I was able to sort of break down the visual dominance of that T-shape, which he was very pleased about. This slide's funny. So with the columns in the demolition having been done, we discovered that there were all these off-form concrete, these quite rough concrete columns and beams. And that raised the question of how do I change the color at the outside corner? Because we're not gonna, if we leave them like this, if we don't render them, what will we do? But everybody liked the roughness and wanted to expose that character in the space. And so then I had to decide how we're going to paint them. So I was talking to the painters and I said, well, look, what if we paint the darker color and sort of wrap it around, covering all all the lumpy broken edges, and then we take the lighter color and just with a roller, you know, roll down that surface, and where the paint hits, you know, that's the edge, that's the meeting point. If we do that carefully, that'll be fine. And the painters said, oh no, we can't do it with the roller, because if we do it with a roller, you'll get these little, it'll flick little bits of the color that you're using onto the other color, and you know, it won't look so good. We're going to do it with a brush. And so they showed me that, you know, they could just run their brush and scribe the edge of the paint on all these rough edges. And they were very pleased with themselves, and we were really thrilled with the result. So that was quite, you know, a lot of people say to me, oh, I bet the painters love you, meaning that really painters must hate working with me. But in fact, I really find the opposite is true. I think painters get really bored painting white walls all day, and they couldn't have been more supportive and more engaged and more willing to work with me and repaint things over and over again until I was happy. This is the library, and this is the final slide. So that's St. Michael, our client in his study, getting ready to cook for a dinner party. I think, you know, he was an incredible client because he didn't try to manage the process. He was just absolutely delighted to be part of it, to be having conversations, to be, you know, he had complete faith in me to resolve any problems. And yeah, an absolutely delightful person to work with. That is the 3 projects. How are we going for time, Jeanette?
Yeah, I think, but it's very interesting, Sonia. So I think you're already on your 45 minutes, but just finish. It's okay, I think.
Yeah, okay. I don't really have that much. I was just going to say, well, yeah, that is basically what I wanted to show you. And quickly, I just wanted to show you, because I thought some people might be interested in this project that I've been doing for a few years around brutalist architecture and colour. This is just a personal project in Canberra. We have a lot of fantastic brutalist buildings, and I know there's a lot of passionate brutalist fans out there, but they're not always colour people. A lot of people hate brutalism because they lack colour. So I decided that I would just do some, I guess, experiments with photographing brutalist buildings in Canberra and then digitally applying colour and murals, and kind of as a provocation to have conversations with people in the architecture world here in Canberra, where at that time I was new when I started this project. I had just moved here from Sydney, and yeah, and so I made these posters, and I've done a series of paste ups, initially pasting up posters around the city, and that's all. Yeah, and then I've also produced fine art prints, which are just a way to really fund the project, to fund the paste ups. So yeah, I'm interested if there are people doing similar things, or if there's people in other countries that have been seeing interesting reuse and reworking of brutalist buildings in their country. That's just an aside, really. So yes, thank you. I look forward to questions, and this is where you can find me. So the Brutal Transformation Project, I call it, has its own Instagram account, and there's a whole kind of gallery there of work which you can take a look at if you're interested.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Before we go to the Q&A, I would like to thank you, because we are stopping the recording. It was really interesting, great presentation. And what I said, we will go to the Q&A now, but first I will stop recording.